Now, I'm joined now by the Federal Housing Minister and Assistant Treasurer, Michael Sukkar in Melbourne. Michael, thank you for your time. Just before we get onto coronavirus, I want to ask about your reaction to Malcolm Turnbull's book, which I spoke about just a moment ago, and I understand you've also read.
Well, Sharri, I've read the parts of the book that have been outlined publicly and some other pieces that have been sent to me. I think, look, it's clearly a book that's seeking to get square. It's, I think, consistent with the quite appalling behaviour we have seen since he left office. So in that respect, it's not surprising.
In the book, Turnbull claims that you and Morrison, so that was when Morrison was Treasurer and you were still the Assistant Treasurer, that you actually wanted to ban negative gearing. Is this true?
Well, no, it's not true, Sharri, and I think there's probably many aspects to the book that I would take with a grain of salt, and that is certainly one. We went to 2 elections opposing Labor's policy, and the Australian people backed us in, and for very good reasons. What we did seek to do, and what we did do when the PM was Treasurer and I was his Assistant Treasurer, was to curb some of the expenses that were being expensed against investment properties, including travel. We did make those changes. We also sought to ensure that there were macro-prudential changes to take some of the heat out of the investor market. Again, something that we did. So those are the things that we wanted to do. Those are the things we did. And we quite rightly opposed Labor's policy, which I would note, Sharri, is still Labor policy. Even in this environment that we are in right now, it's still Labor policy to abolish negative gearing and to double capital gains tax. So quite an appalling policy from Labor that we've opposed for a very long time. The PM and I have opposed that consistently and will continue to.
And I'll ask you a bit more about the housing market in a moment, but just lastly on Turnbull's book, he was actually Communications Minister, setting the laws around the media landscape, and yet he revealed in his book that's out tomorrow that he started the Green Left website, The Guardian, in Australia, that he was instrumental in starting it, or did the deal for it to start here, and he even handpicked its senior journalist. Do you think this was a conflict of interest that he should have declared when he was Communications Minister?
Well, I think it's pretty clear to most fair-minded people that is something that you would think, as a matter of probity, would be declared. Although I do note that the Australian editor of The Guardian, Lenore Taylor, has very different views on the role that Malcolm Turnbull played in the establishment of The Guardian. So depending on who's telling the truth, Malcolm Turnbull or Lenore Taylor, yes, certainly something that for a number of reasons should have been disclosed, and I'm quite surprised was not disclosed. But now that it has been disclosed, I think highlights just the position that the former Prime Minister adopted on many issues.
There's actually just been some...
Obviously, The Guardian...
Breaking news related to Turnbull. There's a bid to have him expelled permanently for life from the Liberal Party because of his book and some of the breach of confidences that have been included in it. Should he be expelled from the Liberal Party?
Well, I haven't seen those reports, Sharri, and in the end that would be a matter for the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party, and that's ultimately a decision for them. I think it would be very sad to see that happen, but as I said at the beginning, some of the quite appalling behaviour we've seen from the former Prime Minister since he left office, I can understand would be a reason why people would be calling for that, but I think that would be a sad thing to do, and in the end would be a decision for the New South Wales division.
Yeah. No, look, on coronavirus, you've obviously been working very closely with the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. What will the ramifications for the economy and for our unemployment levels be if we do not lift restrictions in the middle of May?
Well, Sharri, I don't think you can pinpoint a time. The Prime Minister has been very clear here through the National Cabinet that, and I think he has been vindicated in the approach he has taken, that this is not a short-term fix, that this is preparing Australians for a 6-month problem. I think it's self-evident to everybody that the longer that restrictions continue, the more harm is done to the economy. Having said that, the harm that would be done to the economy if restrictions were lifted prematurely and we had a second round of serious cases and infections, I think would be even more devastating. So there are some very very important things to weigh up here, and they are being considered. I think if you look at where Australia has landed on dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, I'd put up our actions against any other country around the world as being the model for how you deal with this pandemic. So I repose a great deal of trust in the PM and the National Cabinet. I think they've been vindicated in the decisions they've taken thus far. So we've got to manage that delicate balancing act. And in doing so, I think the PM has made clear from the start, whenever he's spoken about protecting lives and importantly protecting livelihoods, he has indicated very strongly that we as a government are very alive to the economic issues that are being caused by the health issues caused by the pandemic.
Have you got some estimates on how much you think Australian house prices will drop by this year? There've been estimates around that it could be up to 15%. Do you think it would be greater than that?
Well, Sharri, we obviously there's many people in the market who have independently spoken about their views on where the housing market would go. Obviously, we've got a very sound and very stable banking system. The banks have obviously made very clear that they are supporting people who are in trouble throughout this time. So I think that provides a great deal of underpinning to the Australian housing market, which means we perhaps won't see the volatility that other jurisdictions would have. And I think in this respect, we must commend the banks who have quite rightfully been criticised in previous years, but have certainly come to the fore at the moment. So, look, I think the Australian housing market, where it goes is very hard to tell, Sharri, but the conduct of the banks, the strength in our banking system means that Australians should have some level of protection, and certainly homeowners have some level of protection as to the value of their biggest asset. But there's no doubt it will have an impact on the housing market.
Look, just lastly, there's been a lot of concern today around a tracing app that the government plans to start this week called COVID Trace. Will you be downloading it? And how concerned are you about the government's ability to, to delete or willingness to delete the data of everyone's movements after coronavirus?
Well, Sharri, of course I would download it as and when we have a product that we suggest to the Australian people that they download. I would lead by example and do that. I think from my perspective, from my family's perspective of living through social distancing and isolation, that if downloading that app and ensuring that proper protections were in place for privacy, but if downloading that app meant that we could get back to some modicum of normal life and seeing our extended family, our parents, our loved ones, our friends, then I would absolutely download it in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Michael Sukkar. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sharri.